All right. Um, Again, another reminder, please have your own timers ready and running, and we'll start with the Prime Minister. Here.
Hi, could someone confirm that I'm audible, please?
Loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. So my Wi-Fi is a bit iffy, so if any time that I break out or lose connection, please tell me. And so I'll start my speech in three, two, one. Really important framing is before we get into this debate. Two of them. First, why there is a rise of drag culture in mainstream media? We see the recent rise in drag in mainstream media mainly through the impact that RuPaul Drag Race has over the recent years, especially with the recent debates about LGBTQ. But before we step into anything, we need to be able to understand that being a drag queen or king doesn't necessarily mean that you are a part of LGBTQ. It's a performance, not an identity. Sure, most queens might be bi or gay or queer, but it doesn't mean that all of them are. That's the most important distinction here. So we can't assume that they are the same thing when they came from different histories and cultural backgrounds. In the status quo, what does this rise look like? It looks like more people are getting interested in watching drag queens through drag brunches or RuPaul Drag Race and consuming media that incorporates the drag queens. This looks like drag queens who become influencers that end up commodifying their body or performance for the sake of entertainment and attention in the mainstream media. This means that there's a lack of actual cultural representation in the mainstream media as these drag queens choose to commodify themselves in order to get attention from the mainstream media. This looks like Plastic Tiara making a get unready with me videos, performance videos, and video edits, etc. The form of drag culture that is being represented in mainstream media is still unidimensional. And so, what is the drag culture? Drag culture doesn't just mean drag queens, but we also need to acknowledge the existence of drag kings too. We can't just glaze over a non-popular part of culture for the sake of this debate. Why is drag kings widely unpopular? Because it doesn't fit into the way our society works, in the sense that it looks wrong and feels wrong for women to act as men, which is the perception of society. And it's easier to accept the fact that there are men cross-dressing as women and looking hotter and sexier than actual women. This gender bias affects the culture at an unprecedented rate as we are now hinged on the idea that drag means drag queens and nothing outside of that because mainstream media wants something to sell to the masses, and drag queens are they're ones that are getting ratings, so be it. So one important preempt. The opposition might say that any form of representation is good, but we want to posit that not all form opposition can just give and take as a good solution at the end of the day. Note that represented means you need to be understood by the people who wants to know or trying to know. It's not just simply you are shown and given exposure and merely that's it. What will happen if you do the representation the wrong way is that there can be backlashes towards the community, like how the drag community is being criticized as a community that's harmful or inappropriate. This took away the true essence of drag community that are supposed to be a form of art and queer expression. Not only that, but also mainstream media has failed to get the majority and hug all representations in the community by favoring cis and gender gay men and drag queens while marginalizing drag kings, trans non-binary performers, and other drag styles such as things and monsters. This narrow casting fails to reflect the true essence of drag culture and exclude many voices within the country. So the idea of any representation is good, just false. So now straight into my argument. First is media uses this drag for profit. We need to understand how media works and operates, especially in a world where everything is commodified for the sake of profit. Media shapes our perception of what a certain thing is, this perception of what drag is and what drag should look like. We need to understand that even if RuPaul did create the drag race for representation, we think that the end goal in mind is still profit, to get enough money to keep the studio running, to keep the ratings high, the stakeholders happy, and get a new season. The opposition cannot deny this claim because this is how media has and always will work. So then the question arises, why is it bad that media is using drag for profit? Because drag is something that's inherently flashy, something sensationalized, something that you can turn to when Kardashians get too boring for you. Because it's exactly what drag is. It's performative, it's flamboyant, and it's exaggerated to get attention. The media uses drag as a way to gain attention through creating controversy with drag queens or kings in the middle. Judges pay attention to how I use the word drag queen or kings, but not drag culture, because the representation we have is not the entirety of drag culture. That's because, again, drag is something most people still don't understand wholly. And even if the opposition teams say that people are smart enough to do their own research and know more about it, but I think that is untrue for three reasons. First, drag roots are inherently niche and hard to find or explore. This is because we are unfamiliar, because every drag queen has a different story or struggle to make ends meet. Because that's how society pushes back against them, they silence their voices. I'm sure some of us don't even know the existence of the word drag mom, because that's just how niche it is. It is a gatekeep secret and culture because exactly it is something that is personal to them and they do not want it to become commodified or even taken as it is ripped apart by the mainstream media. Secondly, people use entertainment purely for entertainment and nothing more. We think that the media shapes your perception of what drag or any culture is in general. The current representation of drag queens and kings tend to be unidimensional as someone who is cross-dressing, wearing makeup, and wearing wigs. They're represented at face value, and you are not incentivized to look for more because you are made to believe that they are just doing performances, and that's quite about it. Thirdly, absolutely no representation in the media of drag culture. Even if there is, the rise is very small. There's a lack of true drag culture representation in the media, exactly because we take drag queens and kings too literally at face value. We take them as actors or as cross-dressers and nothing beyond that, exactly because the media latches onto the performance, that's about it. Even if there is actual drag representation, we feel that it's still something that's very niche and small in scale. So the drag culture representation that we're looking at today is not whole. Second argument, drag is inherently performative and media takes it too literally. This would lead to dilution of culture. Drag, again, is always performative, such as RuPaul's lip sync battle where you sashay, shante, or sashay away. It's flashy, it's flamboyant, and that's what media loves. This means that the culture that is represented is also extremely diluted, that as much depth as it is represented, it is still unidimensional at best, because these drag queens or kings do not have to say or power to go against these higher stakeholders on how they want to be represented. So they have to follow the stereotypes that the media and perception of the people has for them to be able to enter the media in general. This means that the representation hinges on the mainstream media perception towards it's over sex towards the drag culture, which is unidimensional. It stops at performances and not about the culture behind it. Media tends to take it at face value the same way they dilute artists, influencers, and actors as their actions and not them as a person. This is why it is so bad in mainstream media, because they take you for what they think you are and not who you really are. And so the drag culture that is on the rise is not real drag culture, it's just what we think drag culture to be, and for that, proud to propose.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for your speech. Two reminders. One, please mention your POI preference before you start your speech. Otherwise, if the speaker did not mention it, then just assume they want it through chat. Second, please keep your own timers on, not only for your own speeches, but also for the others, so you can deliver your POI appropriately. All right, let's go with the leader of opposition. Here.
Hello, my name is Elna. My pronouns are she, her. My PI preference is unmute because I will not be checking the Zoom chat, and I apologize for the miscommunication because I unmuted during the Prime Minister's speech. But without further ado, I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. As the opposition side, we do not believe that the harms of popularization of drag culture in mainstream media, especially has outweighed the benefits of the drag culture being represented in mainstream media. So let's go on with a few characterizations then. What exactly is mainstream media? Because the government has not characterized this. It is social media, popularization by word of mouth, and also by social media like Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, and also TV shows, dramas, documentaries, or any type of media. Drag culture is heavily associated with the LGBT community, and I will explain later. And the most vulnerable actor of this debate here is the drag community, who is also very impacted by their popularization of their culture and mainstream media. Of course, we agree that not a lot of people in drag community is directly related to the LGBT community, but actually a lot of people in the drag community are closely tied or even part of the LGBTQ community, and drag community has been nothing but welcoming to the LGBTQ community and also have been championing their rights. Stereotypically, drag culture is also associated with the LGBT community, transgender, gay rights, etc., and has been active advocate for these things. And even if it's not fully like that, the mainstream media perceives it to be associated with the LGBTQ community. So what do we want? We want the people who are in the community of drag culture to retain their rights to self-expression that stem from their communities. The motion argues that it regrets drag culture rising in mainstream media is harmful enough to be regretted. That is not true. And if drag culture was taken down fully by mainstream media, it is essentially covers up a real community and a real way of living, a real art form, reverting it back to intolerance of ignorance of the earlier decades. The drag culture done by or is caused by drag community, it shows the culture of art form and the thought and process done by them. It poses the benefits that it displays genuine art form that these people are passionate about, and it gives them a way of self-expression because art is core of expressing your inner self. The mainstream media should be a free speech, not one who covers up the existence of a community that simply wants to do their art. We recognize the harms that they might pose, but we believe the benefits far outweigh the harms. Then, how does the opposition want to solve the problem? By making sure the community has had their own voice and representation seen in mainstream media, so we do not regret it. We would rather keep status quo and simply fix or change up the harms that exist. We think that the harms made by popularization of drag community in mainstream media has delivered more benefits than harms. Why do we believe so? We can see that by moving on to my arguments. Moving on to my arguments then, my first, oh wait, but I would like to rebut some of the government's points as well. They said that the mainstream media portrays them wrong and stereotypes them. We can see that while this may be a problem, but we argue that if they do not exist on media, never mind that some members may be portrayed wrong, people might not know of this community, the existence of this community at all. The problem they say down when they say that some people bring the name of drag community down, it's still the choice of their own people and what they want to show. The government fails to remember that drag is an art form, and art is fundamentally used in order to show it to others. Who else would likely show it to them, and how else would people acknowledge they even exist? But we can see these harms exist. The benefits of mainstream media representation in the part outweighs it because they are known. We as the opposition would propose we fix this problem of the media rather than shutting down a budding art form together. If they have never shown in the media in the first place, labels and stereotypes could still happen from roadshows through non-mainstream media and hoaxes by haters. The danger, so the arguments made by the opposition team is not exclusive to mainstream media. They also said that yes, they get exposed to hate. However, they also get exposed by the same people, same community, and people who are actually tolerant and supportive to them. They said that at least on mainstream media, if the people rallies hard enough, we can still change it because they need profits. On social media, not from mainstream media, let's say from anonymous viral accounts, these are harder to combat. Moving on to my arguments then. How mainstream media impacts the drag community. First of all, it boosted the communities they are championing, including the LGBTQ community, because the mainstream media also perceives drag community and LGBTQ community as really closely tied together. While the LGBTQ community was growing or still underdeveloped compared to now, it was drag culture that made them more popular, that made the world recognize the very existence of these people and the very existence of the LGBTQ community and drag culture and drag community. The new art form, which are drag performances and drag culture, that is a breath of fresh air and a huge difference from other art forms or performances or art culture. So we believe that it has provided a very real benefit towards the LGBTQ community and also for new art forms in general, including cross-dressing, other forms of gender expression, etc. The responses to drag slang and drag culture, although mixed, has provided a huge boost for platform later for the drag community and also the actors that they are championing. It also brings forward tolerance. People realizing that the slang they use is from the drag community, the stuff they do, etc. When it's popularized, people will actually eventually catch hold of the trends inspired or started by the drag community, like the term slay queen that has also stemmed from them. People who have previously hated the drag community will also think, oh, they're pretty cool and pretty chill and pretty funny. Mainstream media has a benefit of uniting people and increasing tolerance for both gender expression and by the drag community. We as the opposition team recognize this very real benefit on our side. It fosters connections and more tolerance in general for both the drag community and also the LGBTQ community. Then art culture. Wait, I would like to accept the POI now.
Okay, so you don't want drag culture to be taken at face value and continue to promote the idea that drag queens are merely cross-dressers?
We do believe that. Oh, wait. Moving on to my arguments first, okay? On mainstream media, it fosters a community. What is art truly? It's something you make to express yourself and to display to world to experience, not in some way or another art that serves purpose to the world and not just the artist. Support on drag community and people of the sort. Everyone has the right to feel represented by their own community, even if it's a minority or not of the norm. As people who are severely underrepresented of the media, we think that the existence of drag culture and the popularization of drag community will be was essentially a good thing because it not only exposed people who didn't know about the existence before, but also people from the drag community alike. Now, people from the drag community has faced aggression and hate for decades, even if it's only a minor representation, like cross-dressing. It is a representation, and it is still enough for these people to feel like they're not a monster or not like severely out of the norm. It gave them a platform and representation to the drag community, and it has very real benefits to them. For example, Thailand back then, because of the popularity in media, it became an activist for drag community and other gender expressions and also LGBTQ rights, and it was known for their drag culture and performances, drag raves, drag concerts, drag slangs, drag queens and kings, etc. Furthermore, the popularization of these slangs has also brought like real-world problems faced by the drag community, built by the community of mainstream media like drag influencers, bringing to like discrimination, drag culture, etc. on their daily lives with the platform they have built. And this is an undeniable benefit on our side that is not exclusive to the government side. That is all for my speech. Thank you.
We thank the leader of all for that speech. Next, we'll have the Deputy Prime Minister here.
Okay. Assuming I'm audible, let me set up my timer. So for the PO, I just type in the chat and I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. We think it's so funny how society demands a more edgy and feminist art like drag, but the moment it gets uncomfortable or confrontational, it's scandalous. But is drag really supposed to be easy to digest by the mainstream media? So before I start onto my arguments and stuff, I would like to rebut some of their points. Firstly, they said how their side wants to protect the vulnerable actor, which is the drag community, but exactly because the drag community is who we are protecting, and by drag community, we means everyone within the community, right? Then how is your side going to protect those people in the community, but who do not fit into the media's expectations because of this rise of popularity in media that only shows the glittery cis male cross-dressing as women type of drag. And secondly, how they said that many people in drag community is LGBT, and how uh we think that there is that association within them. So how we respond to this is that exactly because of this over association, people who are outside of the LGBTQ community but wants to do drag is then sidelined or like not be seen as real drags, because like my first speaker have said before, it the association doesn't mean that the whole community has to be LGBTQ for them to like follow the drag art, right? And thirdly, they said how mainstream media can create more tolerance, but let's just see the truth like in real life right now. Why is it then the forms of drag like drag kings and like political drags are not fully accepted in media? How is that tolerance towards the whole community when you to be able to get a stage within the popular media, drags have to like follow the invisible step by step that the society has given them? Alternatives like documentaries, community driven programs exist, and exposure is much better here since it's driven by the very people, and like authenticity remains true, better than having the mainstream media promote them instead, because people are now incentivized to have a better understanding towards what drag culture really is. Keeping the status quo is bad exactly because, like my first speaker have tirelessly explained to you, is that media commodifies these drag queens and drag cultures at face value instead of what they truly are. So it is their side's hard burden to one, proof that more representation, even if it's superficial, is inherently better than and like quantity alone leads to the progress and how the community will be in the future. And secondly, they must defend a world where drag becomes widely visible, but it's very selective because only certain kinds of performers are be able to get paid. They get their platform, and representation becomes a tool only for mainstream comfort rather than the liberation of the entire drag community. Now, onto my argument on how drag would be perceived in opposition's world and why it is harmful. So, let's talk about how recently Chapel Roan came to a drag show dressed up as like a sex doll as a way to criticize the rise of men objectifying women and whatnot. But she got backlash because it is seemed like she's too much, or like she is a cis woman, so it's weird for her to do like real drag, or like some people even paint her as anti-feminist. This reveals that one, people only want drag when it is easy for them to consume. When drag is like fun, flashy, and like fabulous, it's celebrated and it's loved and it's given it's getting paid even by the media. But when it becomes too political, confrontational, or like not traditional drag, it becomes a type of issue. When historically, drag was never supposed to be comfortable, though, right? It was like a radical street performance. It was performed as a form of like protest, especially back in the day when men in glitter was seen like as a sign of the end of the times. Two, the
Why?
this creates a misrepresentation in drag. Now, before I start onto this point, I would like to take the POI. I did say in chat though, but okay. Okay,
I'm so
whatever.
sorry. I'm so
You can.
sorry. I unmuted in the
Okay.
wrong. But POI, then how is this exclusive to mainstream media and people cannot get the hate outside of like mainstream media? What is the correlation to mainstream media?
So I think what you're trying to say is how then they are getting hate outside of the mainstream media, because like you see Chapel Roan, her makeup and stuff, it is closely related to drag, but most people don't know that, and like some of them even criticize like, that is on she is only using drag makeup. They are not comfortable to the fact that Chapel Roan is drag. That is the part, like it's not only like in comments and stuff, because in real life she's also not seen as like a real part of the drag community. Now, this also actually goes to my second point, because we see in TikToks like those drag kings and stuff, it's only seen as an inspired makeup, as if drag only counts when it's a man performing femininity. It's harder to digest the fact that drag is not just a form of cross dressing, but since that is how media perceives it now, a rigid and two dimensional piece of art, that is how they have to confront to it. So, why do we regret this misinterpretation and oversimplification of the art? One, the real drag community is now marginalized and don't show up as much in media because they know the way their art really is will not fit within the understanding of mainstream media. And B, since now in mainstream media there is a certain ideal image of drag, these people are forced to conform to this idea, like drag influencers. They need to sell their image in a way that is only pleasing to the mainstream media, because that's the only way to make a living out of it. They cannot really truly 100% express the real face of drag as an art, which means we are risking even further simplification of the art in the future. Our world wants to push inclusivity and comparative, even if that means reducing the popularity of drag. At the very least, people who want to do drag can do it without having to conform the ideal image of drag or like the commercial expectations. We believe that the right representation matters more than the quantity. The drag community wins when representation is honest, disruptive, and diverse. But it also shows the true self of the actual community, because that is what creates understanding and pushes the culture forward to the new generation, which is why I'm proud to propose.
Thank you, DPM, for that speech. Just a general reminder to please respect the other speakers' POI preferences. Yeah, I don't know if the way it out of habit can still stand by the fourth round of this competition, but just Please be more mindful, friends. All right, we can move on to the DLO speech. You're here.
Okay, I'll be the second speaker for the opposition team, and my POI reference is just to unmute because I won't be saying the Zoom call from my when I'm doing my speech, and my yeah, and my speech I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Now I would like to start off with some rebuttals first. Now opposition team said that and I would like to answer the POI that the government team had given us before. Now, no, we do not believe that this is the case. They are completely different expressions of art. However, dressing is a fundamental part of drag community. By normalizing it, by representing this activity on mainstream media, it support other people who simply just want to cross-dress. Now, opposition team also said that now, opposition doesn't show how it could protect them from mainstream media because that's not our burden. Our burden is to prove that previously it has provided more benefits than harms because this is as essentially this House regrets motion, which the government team seems to neglect. Now, government team also said that drag only as fun, fearless, and fabulous. It's only seen in mainstream media. Yes, this is a problem, but it is also a problem in the government's case because because we would like to say that how can you guarantee that there are only cross-dressed men in the mainstream media? Even if this is true, there are still other people who doesn't see these drags in those certain negative ways. And I will explain why the benefits are better on our side rather than the harm itself in my second argument. It is not exclusive to up to the government side. It's not exclusive to the opposition side. They say that people will only do it because out of profit. But how will they get profit on the government side of the house without the popularization of mainstream media? Now, we would like to question some likelihood. Now, government team said that Chappell Roan came to a drag show with a drag outfit and she was seen as someone that shouldn't do so and was given negative impacts. We argue that this had nothing to do with her being a woman as she had championed drag people many times. They weren't comfortable with her because she portrayed something that was out of character for her by dressing up like a sex doll. But even if it's true, there are still many of her fans and people who love her outfit and her action. From the world right now, we can see that more people actually see her outfit as iconic, and people do accept the fact that she's part of the drag community. Now, I would like to move on to my arguments. My first argument is that the livelihood source. We would like to say that we can't fully refuse the drag culture because in reality right now, we can see that these drag people, these drag people actually loves their culture and actually does it, and it's part of their job. It really just makes it harder for the drag people to gain their profits and livelihood just by old-fashioned ways like posters on the streets. These days, those are never enough. We need mainstream media exposure so that they are able to further continue doing this job they love and where they can express what they feel through this art form. It's their culture. The culture portrayed by the mainstream media is born of the community with its long history. They want to show and share the love they have for their culture through mainstream media like TV shows and social media posts about their shows they have, sharing their daily lives, their backgrounds, and everything. They need the mainstream media also advertise their own shows. They need the representation of so their culture continues to exist and it's not wiped off from existence from the lack of knowledge and interest. And it's also their job. These drag people have been their former job, has been their former job, and where they get their money from to pay their bills and to build a life to or to sustain their day-to-day life. Now you might be asking, but there are other jobs they
why?
could choose from. Not now, but I would like to say that what if they're those who very inaccessible people that cannot access education, cannot access knowledge to get a real job. As you can see, these people actually take drag culture as their job, just like what you can see sometimes in other countries like Thailand. Now, I would like to move on to my second argument. My second argument is even if young people get exposed, it's still better on our side. Even if the audience get exposed to these kind of things, it's still better on our side. Before I explain further more, I would like to do a reality check first. Mainstream media has been one of the priority things that we see in our day-to-day life. It can be in a form of magazine, a form of social media, and etc. This could give us chance for young teenagers and many adults to see this kind of mainstream media. Not only them, but the kids too. From the government side, it might bring harm towards this audience, but with audiences and the
POI.
itself. But we think that from our side, it makes a better impact for these audiences. Now, even if this kind of mainstream media is seen by these kids, these children, they can get a better perception and a better preparation for the future. By saying this, what I mean is that kids will be exposed to this kind of thing from a young age, and they will be more trained or get more used to these kind of things for the future. For when they actually have to make contact with these kind of people for work, connection, or etc. This can build a minor for these kids to mind for these kids to know that these kinds of people exist in this world. For example, a kid is watching YouTube or Instagram or any Instagram mainstream media, and in the unlikeliness of an event, the kid suddenly sees a drag video or a drag media. This kid itself will get exposed to these kinds of things and understand that there are these kinds of people in the world in the future, and they won't be too shocked when they see these kinds of people or have to interact with them. But you guys might be asking, how will these kids understand? Well, if they do see it on social media, you can see from the world right now, there will be most probably be an explanation in the comment section, or they can get an explanation from their friends who probably knew this from their parents or another source. In the worst case scenario, they do see these things from magazines and other mainstream medias, and they ask their parents and their parents refuse to explain. In this kind of scenario, they can get an explanation in the future, but they already get used to these kind of things now. But before I end my argument, I would like to ask, what's the likelihood for these kids to see these kind of things in the first place? The likelihood is very small. It's very unlikely for kids to see these kind of things in their social media accounts. Not only the kids, but other audiences too. Unless they actually watch this thing in the first place, or they were given kinds of drugs. I would like to accept the PRI now.
So are you saying that it's better if there's more quantity, even if it means that you get now like the whole representation of the community? Is it worth it?
It's definitely worth it, because the reason these drag people have their jobs is that because of their popularity. Without popularity, they won't get the money. Where would they get the money without the popularity itself? Even if there's bad comments, or even there's bad comments, the worst case scenario, there are bad comments, they still get the money from the popularity itself, and there will always still be good comments, there will still always be good feedback, there will always be people who supports these things and fully understand these the drag community and drag culture itself. Now I would like to continue my argument. Or for example, from the government side, there will be few people who know drag people exist in the world, and that could lead to a shock or a very judgmental expression towards them in the future. And for example, the adult version of kid who has never seen a drag person will hire a person who had a drag job because this kid has never really been exposed to a drag person. This could lead to people who want to change jobs and lives to a very rough situation. Therefore, we cannot fully refuse the drag culture from media mainstreams, as it is important for education and knowledge. And I'm proud to oppose.
Thank you, Dale, for that speech. Next, we'll have the government whip. Proposition whip speech. You're here.
Check my clear and audible.
Loud and clear.
PY, just unmute yourself. Pronouns are she, her. Starting in 3, 2, and 1. Opposition need to stop seeing drag community only as cross-dressing and buying in towards how it is okay for the community to be exploited into the profit of the media. A minor or marginalized group should be represented with a careful consideration, and that is what mainstream media cannot provide because the media lacks of the nuance and driven primarily by the profit. Panelists know that this is a this house regret motion, so necessarily we don't need a solution, but even if so, my teammates has already given tons of harms and likelihood on why this is bad, and of course a counterfactual, right? We are so proud to continue to propose. 2 courses of action in the speech. Firstly, I'm going to give a quick firm rebuttals, and at last reviewing the key of clashes that this debate has boiled down to. Firstly, on rebuttals then. What did they say? First, they said if they don't exist, then they cannot be known and showed in the media. And second, media is already tolerant enough to take in whatever the portrayal of drag community is like. But here's the rebuttal, right? 3 things to note here. First, that not all form of representation is good. You cannot just generalize every form of representation as something that is effective, because at the end of the day, what you need is effectiveness and strategy, and not just being merely shown. Second, they clearly forgot or maybe ignored the things that we talk about favoritism in the gender portrayal of the media, that drag queens and drag kings are not the same, and they're not being respected as the same way. And thirdly, the opposition team champions the idea of representation so much that the vulnerable actor are drag queens, but never actually discuss in depth how the rise of drag culture is in their favor and refuse to engage on our idea of their commodifications, right? This questioned their case, as it has already been preempted by my first speaker. How long do you think drag queens continue to be represented as a face value? When will there be a time where their culture is truly represented, right? We're saying that the culture representation today is merely at face value and does not really discuss the culture of drag. through the perspective of drag. It is commodified to be digestible for the mainstream media for profit purposes. The culture we see today is diluted and will lose authenticity over time if we support this motion. So it begs the question, what sort of representation do we really have in mainstream media? They say about social media, documentaries, and movies, but as we have described to you, it is still superficial and unidimensional at best because it is a mainstream after all. So their idea of representation still falls when we consider that we are consuming it to fit our perception and not only for what it truly is. Now, moving on, let's look at two classes here. First on the principle and second on practicality. Slash one then. They bring about how the mainstream media is tolerant enough to take the culture and it is enough for the community to feel enough. Three things I'm going to weigh here. First, the fact that RuPaul is the first thing that are being stereotyped is a tokenism, right? This is bad because it tolerates differences only at the most basic level and it creates an illusion that leaves or excluded the issues of inequality and undress itself, right? Why this is likely to happen? Because the authenticity that are in the media is not well provided. As a person who don't know about drag queen or drag community or are new and trying to find out about it in the first time towards the media, they're getting the commercialized and sensationalized version for the audience and not the true essence of what drag community is actually is. Second, we need to acknowledge that there are other alternatives that can be done, for example, like community driven programs and exposure, as well as documentaries. The authenticity is better then because it involves various people instead of taking mainstream media where there's countless of sides, there's countless of different perspectives on each of its community, right? Third, opposition said that they are tolerant enough, but drag related issues varies on a lot of political or social orientation of the media itself. Like let's say, for example, the right wing media tend to highlight concerns about drag as something that is inappropriate, something that is sexual. But in the left media, they focus on LGBT rights and portray anti drag legislation as something that is a discrimination, right? This polarization or picturization in coverage leads to a lot of misunderstanding and intolerance in the status quo instead of understanding what this drag community actually is. Question the practical. They bring about one main thing here, how they want drag community to be able to freely express themselves and freely dress the way they want. That's basically it. That's what their case stands on. But what we bring here, there will be two weighing. First, over commercialization is never good to begin with. Not that the community wants to, but it's the only way that this drag community can get attention and money, right? That is why the media only promotes performatism that only dilutes drag culture and paint the wrong picture for the viewers by giving drag culture as something that is aggressive, by something that is much of a sexual things and so on, right? But then let's just opt in into their case and see their best case scenario. Let's see their side. Okay, sorry. But before best case scenario, is there any POI maybe? Going once, twice, thrice? No? Let's just move on to the best case scenario then. Let's say we go to opposition case that they flood the media and mainstream platform with queer drag performers and perhaps marginalized faces, but only to the ones who are marketable, palatable, and easy to digest and easy to sexualize, right? The diversity looks impressive on the surface, but really we get the same type of drag queen over and over again about who it is and so on, about chiss, glamorous, how you're funny, how you're bold, and so on. But it is not too political that it makes you uncomfortable. So what is the impact then? Representation becomes a branding tool, but not a mechanism for empowerment, not a mechanism for knowledge. Audiences consume this kind of version of inclusion and think that, oh, the progress has been made. We have made the community to be known. Meanwhile, the real voices of drag community, the real essence of what they truly or who they truly are is still silence, right? And also, let's just opt in the worst case where let's say they're not being shown as much in the media or they don't get as many shows in the prime time, right? Maybe queer and drag content isn't always viral, isn't always trending or known, but the representation that exists is still authentic and rich. This representation under our world can still be seen and reaching out to the new generation of drags by local drag clubs, for example, or performers where drags are given stage time not just to profit but for expression. Sorry. Plus, none of the true drag is not
pressed or having to follow the media's expectation, it can teach young performers or people who just know about drugs that they don't have to sexualize themselves, and there's no limitations or divisions of the representation that they're trying to express themselves by being dressed in or trying to see themselves as who they are, right? Therefore, under all of that, we're so proud to continue to propose.
Thank you, Proposition Whip, for that speech. Next, we'll have the Opposition Whip.
Sorry, good morning, panels, members of both opposition and government teams. My name is Nadine, and today I'll be speaking as the opposition whip. My speech will start in 3, 2, 1. Why would you make a controversial art piece to represent a minority and not expose it to mainstream media, to mainstream people, where most people get the information from? This is the burden government has yet to prove us, but calling it out on our first speaker. All right, we conceded there might be a toxic problematic behavior, but we can still fix this. Let's go and refute some of their points and show why our side is better. It is better to fix the already toxic and problematic behavior than completely take it down completely, as would happen if we were truly regretted that this representation happened. Let's look at these benefits, because if these people are able to better understand and know the fact that these people do exist and they are there to disprove how harmful the media is, we argue heavily that there may be cases. We know that the media, we agree, we concede with the government that problems with the media still exist, and while there may be cases where there's stereotype and labelized without the truth to the drag community, but representing it, we can still see that the problem exists in the media. It exposes the media, so we know the problem. If we were never exposed in the first place, we wouldn't have this problem. Yes, but the problem of them being stereotyped and labelized still exists, even out of mainstream media. When it's in mainstream media, problems are brought more to light. We can see this how when a celebrity does something terrible compared to a regular person who does something terrible, who do you think people will be more concerned about? The celebrity. And if the problem is something new, then people will obviously now know that it's something bad. And then the cases start dropping down on it happening because people now are understanding it. Humans don't know everything all at once. We learn one by one through experiences we have seen. If we believe in the long run that with representing it can become better with public support. Regarding it does nothing to solve this problem. We bite the bullet that mainstream media is problematic. Yes, but it will be worse if they were not shown at all, and that the living thoughts of people pre-media was just weird, calling them weird clowns, or even worse than that. While it's harmful, it's still better than before mainstream media, and we stand to believe it can become better. The harms they pose is misrepresentation. Note they have one harm here, whereas for benefits we have brought up so many. Just check back at the previous speakers and arguments of free speech and representation of art. What is art truly? It is something that you make to express yourself, and then you display it for the world to experience. In some way or another, art serves a purpose to give to the world and not just the artist. Well, yes, this can happen through roadshow shows. Do you really think that these drag people don't want more exposure to the world? It's a performative art, and people who are performing the art tend to want more people to see them, because that's the whole function of their art. Yes, they represent themselves, but they also show their culture to other people. Art is something that has to be shown and displayed. That's why it's so prominent in mainstream media, because that is the way they're able to show their art form to the world. Taking it down means that less people will know about the culture, and by extension, the community. They will face a problem of lack of supporters back in their shows and art from. Simply put, in today's era where mainstream media is everything, it is simply not enough for them to survive on posters and roadside shows. They need more than that, especially with the growing community that needs more support. The drag community is not all over the world, and having them on mainstream media also helps them build a better sense of community by acknowledging the others around them so that they know of each other and able to communicate or just learn and enjoy the performances of their fellow drag community. The vulnerable factors are the performance of the drag community itself. They might be a vulnerable actor on our side, but they're also a vulnerable actor on the government side too, because in their case, they won't get as many viewers or popularity from the world itself with mainstream media, because posters and magazines just aren't enough to gain popularity or viewers in the world right now. Therefore, with less popularity and viewers, less people will know their culture, leading to less people actually understanding the whole entire culture. Then again, we also said that with less exposure, more people would judge and give more negative feedback toward them because they are not used to getting exposed to these kind of things, making the performers as more vulnerable actor on the government side. Not only that, like what my second speaker has said, they need the popularity and viewers to get the money. Therefore, with less popularity and viewers, it will make it harder for them, making them more vulnerable actor under government's world. They said also that the culture represented today is not seen as a real thing. So what you're saying is that those clearly cast as men aren't drag. They may be the things that are seen most in drag community, but they're still the drag community. We still want them to be portrayed. It's just the media itself shows. We agree on this, right? We can still fix the media instead of regretting it never happened in the first place. Again, we can compare the problems before and after the media represented it. And they also said about the favoritism on drag with the drag kings. We've already responded to that before, so moving on. The mainstream media portrays them wrong and stereotypes them. We can see this as a problem. Again, if they did not exist in the media, it would be they're easier to be portrayed even wrong because people will not have an idea because they don't know what they are. They only hear of them from the passing wit and gossip, and they won't even know what they're supposed to do. At least on mainstream media, if the people rallies hard enough, we can still change it because they need profits on social media, not from on social media, not mainstream media. There's anonymous with viral accounts. These are harder to combat. There's a representation of other drag forms and drags in politics, even if it's a minority. And the government contradicts itself by saying that it's fine if drag people aren't unrecognized if they can still maintain the accents of drag culture, but recognize that people will not be able to make a living out of it and pour essence into an art that is not recognized and not validated, unlike our side. While it is a community, it's a way of life, it is also an art form. An art form requires support to continue to exist. I'll be receiving that TOI now.
Okay, you said that even outside of media, they still get viewed negative, and we question who set that system up. Because when we told you that it's because mainstream media that are nuanced.
All right, let's think about this from before. Let's think about when everyone under the drag community was still wildly hated before even mainstream media. They've always been hated. Mainstream media has been one of the first ones to actually show their support to them in the public. And because of mainstream media we have now, people are now treated better. Before mainstream media, the one who set the narrative, it existed way before mainstream media even existed in what we believe it is now. How? Through rumor mills, through what people have thought about it, through old, controversial, outdated ideas on these people. All right, now we can move on to the clash, which is basically, was the mainstream media good or not for drag? What are the harms and benefits of this? They believe that the media has done so much harm in the fact that the media portrays the media as wrong and unrespected, especially between drag queen and drag king, and all the other forms of drag. Meanwhile, we said, let's see where the benefits was still better, while the representation now is, we admit, less than good. Do you forget that before it was even represented, it was even worse? The fact they were treated as clowns and not as a real art form, not as real people. They were laughed at on the streets and bullied. People now treat them a lot better than, let's say, 30 years ago. This can continue to go down. We also brought up so many different benefits in our arguments. So basically, more representation for the livelihoods of these people. All right, the world that the government proposes does not fix the problem that they have where drag people aren't portrayed well if they were now suddenly taken down. It doesn't solve the problem. People, no matter what, will still have the wrong idea of drag culture. Both sides agree that we want better treatment for the people of the drag community. But on their side, best case scenario where drag people weren't even represented in the first place, treatment for these people is still terrible. Media has normalized now these people, whatever their form, in our worst and whatever their form is still people and they should still be respected. In our worst case scenario, people are still represented, but wrong. They're still treated better and no longer bullied and threatened on the streets. They have protection. They now have protection than before. That is all for my speech. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm very proud to oppose this motion.
We thank the opposition for that speech. Next, we'll have the opposition reply.
Hello, everyone. My name is Auna, and I'll be the reply speaker from the opposition team. Okay. And I'm going to be starting, sorry, my reply speech, but keep in mind that I have a sore throat, so yeah. I'm going to start my reply speech in 3, 2, 1. How I'll structure my reply speech is I would like to first call out a few things that the government team has said. First of all, they have not characterized the most vulnerable actors in their press speaker speeches, and they have not exactly characterized what their goals are and what the benefits and harms are exactly on the first speaker. And they only brought out the counter narrative on their second speaker and elaborated on third speaker. and they only brought out the burden of opposition on the second speaker. On the government side, they whilst we have provided a clear definition of mainstream media, drag culture and its associations, drag community, and etc. On the government side, they didn't guarantee how the drag community will reach audiences in general, despite us disproving it. Without mainstream media, it will not reach audiences, therefore just undermining the existence of the culture itself. And they failed to prove why it's still fine for these people to be underrepresented and like not known by the public because they are not and mischaracterized by the public heavily because of the mainstream media. Because they do not support the existence of mainstream media, right? Then why was the mainstream media good for drag people and what are the harms and benefits? The world that the government proposes is a highly idealistic world where drag people aren't portrayed as if suddenly they will be portrayed as people who that there will be no harms on their side, that there will be no hate towards the drag community that is now underrepresented and not known by the media, by the mainstream media, etc. Where drag people aren't portrayed well. Now, if this were to suddenly take it down, it doesn't solve the problem no matter what. It will still have people will still have the wrong idea on drag culture. However, they have no platform to clear it up. Unlike on our side, we have the mainstream media. If there are mischaracterizations, there it could be clarified by mainstream media. However, on the opposite on the government side, they have not proven that. And if we, as we have stated before, if we were currently be in the government's world right now, then drag people would still be perceived as monsters, and it would not like be an expression of art and gender norms that is globally spread out because it would only remain in one place, and people in other places do not feel represented. Speaking of represented, they also have not responded to our arguments about how drag people will feel more represented and will foster a community because of drag the publication of drag people and the harm that they brought is they only brought one harm, while our side we have provided a lot more benefits and even disproved of the harm, even proving even if they know what the benefits are just by pure number, the benefits have on our side have outweighed the harms that they have stated our side has. We have also want to point out that the government contradicts themselves by saying that it's fine for drag people are under-recognized if they can still maintain the essence of drag culture, but recognize that people will not be making a living out of it and force essence into an art that is not recognized or validated, making them more discouraged, unlike on our side. When we have proven that at least mainstream media, if the people rallies hard enough, we can still change it because they need profits on social media, not from mainstream media, let's say from anonymous viral accounts. These are harder to combat. Okay, that is all for my reply speech. Thank you.
I think the opposition reply for their speech. Next, we'll have the proposition reply if you hear.
Okay, am I audible?
Loud and clear.
So if there's any background noises, please ignore it. Someone's mowing the lawn either way. So I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I'm going to throw shade because this is not a world reset motion. It doesn't mean the second we regret this motion, suddenly drag queens go jobless. This means that the representation would still exist and would still be better on our side because we prefer a more authentic representation because we're regretting the current rise in the mainstream media. So in this debate, we just need to provide enough reasons to regret the motion. And I don't understand what op stance is because they seem to agree with us. So they still haven't engaged with the idea we posit that media representation of drag culture is unidimensional and superficial. They even conceded to that. This is a fatal mistake because they can't seem to explain why drag culture is still better other than saying glitter is drag culture. Again, we're talking about regretting the rise of drag culture, not we regret drag culture. Those are two different things. And I think it's clear which side is actually debating on the spirit of the motion. So really important two clashes is simple. First is representation. On government, what we want to posit is that the representation to be authentic from the perspective of drag instead of the perception of the mainstream media, because like we have characterized again and again, that even the representation in mainstream media is bad because of two things. First, it's unidimensional. We have explained again and again tirelessly that the representation of drag culture in uni is unidimensional and superficial, because exactly it hinges on the mainstream media's perception of towards drag, which they have very little knowledge in the first place because drag has been fed into them on a silver spoon, and there's no other incentive to know more about drag culture because the other forms of more authentic representation is not publicized or marketed in mainstream media at all. Because again, mainstream media is about profit and gaining attention from the flamboyance of drag queens, and also we still have underrepresented drag kings. Doesn't The drag queens will still, and every part of drag will still exist after, even if we regret this motion, we just regret the toxic representation of drag culture, because exactly you fit into what the mainstream media wants and not what the actual drag community wants, which is the holistic representation. So their idea of representation comes at the cost. So opposition's idea of representation comes cost at the cost of the other half of the drag community, which is exactly why we need to regret it, because they're a marginalized community, often oppressed. They want a more holistic representation. The next thing is that delusion of culture and authenticity. We regret the representation of drag culture in mainstream media because it isn't drag culture, it's what mainstream media thinks what drag culture is. We're only at the tip of the iceberg, and there's no incentive. So even if they continue to represent it in the long term, it comes at the risk of losing the culture and its authenticity, because now drag queens are turning to commodify their body and performances for the sake of profit. Again, there is no real incentive for them to truly represent their culture, and the easiest way to get money is through exaggerated performances. And so on up, their idea of representation pushes the stereotype and negative perception that the mainstream media have, because this is what society pushes onto us, and what we perceive to be wrong or right since the second our mom told us about birds and bees. The idea that they would push drag queens to the front and center, have them take the brunt of it all, and hope that they come out alive and in one piece, and then at the end of it, and there is still no guarantee that they will represent them for the drag culture as it is authentically without it being diluted. So, second clash, mainstream media. Asking how children see drag if they're not in mainstream media. I don't know how this is relevant, but let's be charitable. Even if it is this house regret motion, and we don't need to provide a counterfactual. On government, we want to push local drag clubs or performances where drags are given stage time, not just for profit, but for expression. This way, the new generation of drag will be able to see drag in a form that is not pressed to having followed the media's expectation. They can be their authentic selves. This doesn't exist on up, because now they do it only for money, and they don't represent their own culture. Our world will teach young performers that they don't have to be RuPaul clones to matter or to be valid. And in opposition's world, when they say it's worth to simplify the art into glamorous cross-dressing instead of its real messy confrontative art, even if there will be a new generation of drag, they will all only be the society accept version of drag. The true drag will continue and be oppressed even more. Upside fail to answer their biggest burden and instead fail to achieve their goal of wanting to empower the drag community, and for that, proud to propose.